Hello, hello, friends. I'm Shayna, your co-host today, joined with the amazing, my co-host, Marcus Harkis. How are you today, Marcus?
I'm alive and well.
Alive and well, and I'm excited. Are you excited? We have the man, the myth, Anthony Newby from Cultivated CBD. How are you today, Anthony?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So I'm really excited to talk about your background. You have somewhat of a similar, well, I guess, unique background, not similar to some of the other entrepreneurs in this space. You came from like a social advocacy background. You're kind of like an activist and things. Kind of talk about what led you in this direction and getting into, CBD and cannabis.
Yeah, so it was sort of a long journey that really started in high school.
Mm-hmm.
My cannabis journey probably started high school, maybe middle school. And so I was, one of the many kids that was using and experimenting with cannabis kind of all through my life, starting at probably, as a teenager, really. And I think looking back, probably a healthy way. It was used socially, but also I think it just helped. I was raised in small town Minnesota, in Bemidji, Minnesota.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of, as great as it was in a lot of ways, there was a lot of tense moments, and cannabis became one of the ways I think that helped me navigate through some difficult social circumstances in rural Minnesota. But that continued through college. I went to college at Howard University in D.C.
HBCUs represent.
HBCU. And, that wasn't alcohol campus at all. A lot of HBCUs are much more heavily, lean heavily towards cannabis as opposed to keg parties and that kind of thing.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
So it was very normalized on campus. I met some really, really smart people that were going back and forth on the weekends to North Carolina, South Carolina, and bringing really pounds of cannabis and dropping it off in the South, and then would be back in class on Monday. And so it was this whole economy was moving that was very normalized. And I learned a lot about sort of drug culture in general. For example, on the college campus, a very good friend of mine across the hall, one of the smartest guys that I ever met, had friends that would come from New York and Sarah Lawrence College. And these were white kids who came from rich families.
Right.
And they would come to Howard and they would literally smoke crack and kick it in the street for the weekend and then go back to New York. And I remember thinking, like, everything I had been taught about drugs was like, crack, you'll be under a bridge.
Right, yeah.
Right? At that point, this was in the mid-'90s, the narrative was crack is this thing that will, change how you think and act and will turn you into a demon. And I immediately was like, well, that's obviously not true. These kids are coming down here experimenting with drugs and then going back to Sarah Lawrence College. And I remember getting educated by my friend who was like, oh, you bought into this notion that drugs are a certain thing, and you don't realize that it's much less about the actual chemical and much more about a social construct about what drugs are and what they're not and how they affect people and who it affects. And so I've had a long education in cannabis and what it is and what it isn't. And my activism and organizing has developed sort of in tandem and in parallel with that. And they've come together now in this new economy. And somehow, even though I didn't plan it, the activism, the organizing, and this new emerging economy somehow have all come together in a way that makes sense for me in my life.
Well, let's kind of step back and talk about some of the specific organizations that you've, initiated and led. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that we should really know about that background and how that was a segue to, starting your cannabis business.
So the organizing work started a little organically as well. I mean, I went to Howard and went to D.C. because I knew that was a place where power was built. I didn't, as a young person, I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew big ideas were moving in D.C. somehow, and I wanted to be a part of that. Fast forward, I ended up moving back to Minneapolis, working for Prince at his nightclub.
Oh, wow.
Where I learned a whole lot about Black creative genius. And formed a network of people.
Genius, for sure.
He was absolutely a genius in many ways, not just musically, of course, but the way he thought about business and entrepreneurship and ownership. And it was just an interesting cocktail. And so my network as a young person coming from Howard in DC was now this whole world informed by Prince and the people that he attracted to his network. And so I learned a great deal about business and organizing and activism,
Right.
and when to be public and when to be private. And a lot of that came from that orbit. Fast forward, there was a tornado that came through Minneapolis in 2011.
Remember that.
Remember
I was
that?
sitting in my garage all night.
You in your garage?
Yeah, I just thought, damn, it's windy outside.
It was weird.
Were you in your garage when it hit?
Yeah, it all struck like I lived off of 49th, and all the damage started on 46th.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah. Well, 6th and Russell. And this thing tears through the neighborhood, and I just sort of organically, like many people, I'm sure you did the same thing, Marcus, where you just end up in the neighborhood and who's doing what and who needs help and whose tree got hit by a da-da-da. And then it turned into, well, there's mounted police, but there's no Red Cross. And now there's 5,000 people roughly that are just disappearing from the neighborhood, and people don't really even know where people are coming and going. There's not a whole lot of resources, and one thing led to another, and I got connected to a small organization called Knock, which was handing out flyers basically and trying to get resources to people who needed it, and linked with that organization and then just stayed with it. It felt like kind of an organic home. On my off time, I would just spend kind of building political power with neighbors who were now thinking about their neighborhood in a different way, and the rebuild part of post-tornado, and how do we put the neighborhood kind of back together. So that led me to a number of different things within that organization, related to housing instability, transportation, related issues that opened up this whole Pandora's box, and a platform where at a local neighborhood level, working with other neighbors, all the stuff that I had learned through Prince and through Howard and as a young person suddenly came together, and there was a way and a platform. And eventually Marcus and I even worked there together on some education stuff. Yeah. Marcus has always been one of the best
He's
organizers.
always the gel that seems
man.
bring everyone together.
Yeah, man. Again, super organic. Yeah. But everybody knows Marcus on the north side. I mean, now all over the state, all over the country, as your brand has grown. But it was a no-brainer. He came in and did some education work among many other things. So it was a multi-issue organization that really grew in power over time and had an influence on a whole range of things, from homelessness and housing, and moving homeless families into vacant houses. Oh wow! That were bank owned during the foreclosure crisis, and so a number of different. What now people would probably consider radical, but at the time we did, and it was all very organic. Some of the Trayvon Martin organizing and Jamar Clark organizing around police violence, but it was all very organic. It was all driven by the neighborhood and the community, and some large-scale policies were passed out of that. And I'm really proud of the work that the neighborhood did during that period, even though at times it looked like it was shutting down roads and bridges, or the Mall of America would get disrupted and shut down. And to a lot of people, it probably looked very chaotic, and it looked like, it's just young people causing a ruckus and doing things without intention and without goals and motivations and whatever. But it really was not that. You might see on TV the mall getting shut down, but didn't realize that there was a negotiation happening with the governor at the same time about a $1.8 billion surplus and how some of that money gets routed back to the community. So from my perspective, it was like, again, community-driven stuff that really accomplished some great things in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your work, and Marcus, I always tell you that I appreciate you. And one thing, just a shout out to Minnesota and all the advocacy work that's done in this state. And like you said, it's very organized. And we know prohibition and cannabis is steeped in racism, but what was your aha moment that said, okay, I want to start Cultivated CBD? Where did the name come from? What made you wake up and say, I need to do this now?
Yeah, again, it was like a lot of things in my life. It's been very organic. I rarely set out to do, some people are super goal driven and they'll set a thing that's like 10 years away and they'll work to do that thing. In my life, things have always developed kind of much more organically. And so it really came out of, as I transitioned out of that organization, there were a couple things that I was interested in carrying on outside the organization. One was universal basic income. And I was meeting with some folks in Silicon Valley and one of the former founders of Facebook, Chris Hughes, and a whole network of people who were really motivated around this. And cannabis was the other thing, because we could sort of 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, a lot longer for Marcus, who's been working on that policy side forever. But something is happening nationally. It's going to end up in Minnesota, and what are we going to do about it? Who's really going to benefit from this economy? And so I started bringing in folks from out of state to meet with mayors of both Minneapolis and St. Paul from the relationships that I had gathered through the organizing work, and state regulators and others, really just on the policy side, right? Here's friends from Oregon or California, and they understand some of what worked and what didn't. And out of that came this idea from one particular guy that I went to high school with, who had a dispensary in Oregon. And we just said, why don't we just experiment with a line of CBD products, in particular flower. Oregon produces, as you all know, some of the greatest flower in the world. And so it started really with CBD flower that, I would bring in on my off time to tobacco shops. And one store turned into 2, and 2 turned into 5. And then owners started calling cousins and relatives, and 5 turned into 10, turned into 50, and eventually we found a distributor. And then that was all the time that I had. It just consumed all of my time, and I had to build some staff and just to keep up with still a small business, but the demand on the CBD side. And we never really looked back. From those early days of just an experiment, it just kind of grew and grew.
Yeah.
So looking back on 2023, we're at the end. There have been a lot of significant events, but perhaps none as big as the passage of House File 100. What was the legislative process like for you, and what was it like seeing the bill finally get signed into the law?
I'm lucky enough through the organizing and activism, I'd been through many, many different versions of a legislative cycle, at the local level, state level, even federally. And so I had some sense of what it takes to make a law and pass a law and how difficult it is and what it is and what it isn't. So in some ways it was not surprising, the process, because it was very similar in some ways to passing all sorts of other, and from raising minimum wage, and I was part of an effort to raise minimum wage statewide, or earn sick and safe time, which just passed. But I think we were working on that even probably back then, 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it just passed this year to driver license for all. Again, multi-issues, including some police accountability stuff, where I knew and had a sense of how the sausage was made, if you will. So that part wasn't surprising. This was the same process. It still has to pass the House, the Senate. The governor has to sign something into law. The things that were unique and different, it was a lot less fractured of a community than a lot of other initiatives I've been a part of. Even though there were different camps, and there definitely were different.
I have to say, it kind of all came together this year. It was way more fractured before this year.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you speak on that, because you've been through many, many cycles on the cannabis stuff. Yeah. And I'm sure it's felt for you, Marcus, like you were on an island a lot of times. I've watched you work on kind of an island where you would be one of the only advocates that was super vocal and before it was cool, quote unquote cool, to be public about this. Now it's easy for anybody and everybody to jump in. But there was a time when it just was not very cool to be public about this. And it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
You deserve a lot of credit.
I left NOC around early 2014, and then I started working on this full time by the summer of 2014. It was like
right after that? I didn't realize the
right
timing.
after that. I went from NOC to Minnesota Normal.
Wow.
I mean, it was like several month gap, but yeah.
I remember Normal held a meeting And Kurt was part of that.
You met them before I did, and I met
Was
them
it before
separately.
them?
Yeah, I think it was around that same year.
That same time.
Yeah.
Kurt, Hannah, who's now doing great work at the Kaplan with Minnesota Normal.
Oh, okay, great.
Was part of Normal then, and he was part of a camp that had this idea to host this meeting on the north side, which at the time was a radical concept for Normal.
Right.
Culturally, it was just like a big leap to go into a black community in a black neighborhood and host a meeting. It was like, how is this going to work? How is this going to go? For us, we were like, come on in, just, use the space, do what you want to do. But yeah, I watched Marcus and others very early embrace it in a very public way, and you deserve a lot of credit.
Yes,
and
always giving him his flowers.
From my perspective,
appreciate that.
you deserve a lot of credit for how we got here. You were one of the
you were
pioneers.
very involved this year, more than most people. So, and bringing your past experience added a lot of value to the process. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do what I can.
Okay, so by the end of the day on August 1st, you had already sold more than 15,000 cannabis seeds. What was that like? What has it been like since carrying seeds? Tell us a bit more about your partnership with Logie Bloom and Cat Franklin.
Yeah, so Logie Bloom is some of the best operators in the country. Really, they happen to be from Minnesota. Oh, okay. Cat Franklin is one of them, but she's worked in 20 plus states. For all sorts of companies from small size all the way up to big multi-state operators, and has a ton of experience as an operator.
So relationship building is key. It sounds like that's the theme of what got you here.
Yeah, I would have to say, yeah. I just recognized in Kat and her partner, 10 Bears, who similarly has worked all over the country but is set up in Minnesota. Kat, as a side note, and this is significant, helped to develop the Gorilla Glue strain, GG4.
Oh, wow.
Which is fire. God damn.
Yeah. Kat and her former business partner, who has since passed away, Josie Wales. So if you Google Josie Wales, you'll find a whole bunch of information on some of the best genetics in the country. He's one of those old school guys that was woodshedding and workshopping decades ago. And Kat comes from that. So they had great genetics, and we had the ability to deliver quickly to consumers through our distribution network and online and this and that. We knew that once the law was changing, we'd have an opportunity. And so it just made sense that genetics coming from that world and that company, Logie Bloom, Cat, and 10 Bears. And, yeah, we sold 15,000 seeds really, really quickly, maybe a month or so. And it's just great to see people that have never, planted before, never smoked before, never experienced cannabis suddenly be able to grow in their own home. And, we're getting text messages and emails and how do I do it? What soil do I use? How do I so it's been a great experience to see people get involved who maybe
So do you have like some understudies, or how has that been for you, just embracing people who are interested in wanting to kind of like get into this space?
Really we need to rely more on the Cannabis College and some of the infrastructure that already exists. And that's part of the goal is to, we know what we're good at, but the education piece is really like, to do it well, there needs to be a deliberate, intentional space where that's what's happening. It's less about commerce and buying and selling or building brands, and it's more about, getting knowledge directly to consumers. So we want to do that. We want to work more closely with the Cannabis College. I know there's others now that are popping up. St. Paul College is experimenting with the program, and other university settings are going to embrace that. But the Cannabis College deserves its flowers.
Thank you.
On the education side.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so let's talk about products. So moving from seeds to other things, and we'll be doing some taste testing. Kind of talk about what you've done here as we're wrapping up at the end of the year and moving into 2024. What does it look like with like your product offering? Yeah,
so we started again with flower, sourced from Oregon, and we've since done our best to move more and more of the production into Minnesota. So we brought some beverages and gummies with us. The beverages, we took 14 months to develop this beverage line.
Now, is that typical, or what does that process usually look like? When you
I think it's a little atypical.
Okay.
I think, we certainly were not the earliest to market by any means. And we took our time because we wanted to do a few things. We were doing it for us, really. Like most of our products, we do it for the people that we work with, and then hopefully other people like it too.
Yeah.
And so it took us 14 months to get something that we really loved. And it's different than a traditional seltzer, which is maybe water and a little bit of flavoring. This is real fruit purees. This is real fruit lemonade based. And those combinations of flavors together to get them safely in a can, because it is real fruit. It's a reason why a lot of companies don't use it. It's hard to scale up a real fruit product. It just took us a long time to get it all right. So we're really excited about it. Now we have distribution, and we're in 300 or 400 retail stores, and it's growing kind of every day. The big chain stores are now taking them in, the Cub Foods and Total Wines and Kowalski's and things of that nature.
Oh, nice.
Are moving more in this direction, and that's great for us. And so we want to expand on the beverage thing. When we started, I don't know how you feel about this, you guys feel about it, but initially we were a little skeptical.
I'm more flowers.
People don't drink their weed was kind of our thing. It's like we see what's happening in Minnesota, but we weren't convinced that this was the route that we wanted to go.
Yeah.
But watching consumers, again, who either aren't interested in smoking cannabis, there's still a stigma for some people. This is an easier, more discreet product.
I think for me it's about control too. So what advice would you give from the consumer standpoint in terms of who are open-minded like me, who specifically flower and want to try some of these drinks? I mean, like, what would be like some advice in terms of what to look for? You said it was kind of atypical when you launched this one, but what from a consumer standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're into flower, that's great. I would say the whole team that we work with is in a similar camp, and we're skeptical. The thing that's unique about these is just the flavor. We started with the flavor first portion of this. And so, frankly, we think it's great unmedicated. We may release an unmedicated version of this.
You should.
Particularly for stadiums. We do a lot of work with sports and entertainment, and there's still a hesitancy to bring this into the Twin Stadium or the Wolves, which are killing it this year. We want to be in the stadium and be in the suites and have people have this as an alternative to Coke.
I've been to some games, the Vikings game, and people in the alcohol. It's like, come on, people.
Yeah. The people deserve an alternative to just the beer and alcohol.
Yeah.
And so an unmedicated version of this that tastes identical is a way for us to get into those markets early and then transition as that market transitions. But the point is they taste great, and so give it a try. If you're into flower or other products, or if you've never tried cannabis, you're gonna enjoy the flavor and the experience. And then start slow. That's what we tell everybody with cannabis. We have a 5 milligram light option and a 10 milligram max. 10 milligrams is of course the max that the law will allow per can. And so start with a 5 and sip on it and try it out. I think you won't be disappointed, and move up to 10 over time. And then, of course, once rec opens up, people are going to be able to buy 100 milligram, 200 milligram, 500 milligrams.
Be careful with that. I remember when Colorado did its thing in 2014. I smoked a giant joint, and I drank a 100 milligram thing of liquid, and I was leaning my head on the airplane window like, God damn it, when is this going in? How am I going to leave the airport when it's that many outlets?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm sort of a low dose guy. I enjoy low. A lot of people call it micros during the day, as opposed to some other people who really enjoy much higher doses. But for me, I enjoy the micros. And I think there's a lot of people like that, particularly new people who are just experiencing it, or older people who maybe in high school but haven't used it for 20 years, haven't used cannabis for various reasons, and now are experimenting. These low-dose options are just a very easy way to
kind of ease your way into it. Oh, yeah, that's great.
So you were in invaluable part of some of our first Grow at Home classes, helping to introduce Dr. Dabbs and
Dr. Dabbs.
showed some photos of you two from years ago. Tell us about those classes from your perspective.
Yeah, man. What the Cannabis College and Canna Connect has done is give a platform again for people who are anywhere from connoisseurs who are super experienced and want to get ahead of the market to people who are brand new. And so I was invited in, and I'm very grateful for that. And Clem and I have worked together for probably the better part of 10 years, going back to the knock days.
Yeah.
And Clem deserves, I tell this story to anybody who will listen. Clem isn't just a cannabis entrepreneur guy or a mad scientist guy. I met him because as Knock was taking over vacant lots of city-owned property that were neglected and glass strewn and mattresses and garbage and this and that, we would do our best to come and have the community reclaim them. We didn't ask permission. We weren't doing permits. We didn't even know how to do permits back in those days. It was just like taking over guerrilla gardening. It was guerrilla gardening. And Clem was a guy who just showed up, and he would teach neighborhood kids how to grow fruits and vegetables in these vacant lots for no money, for no attention, no press, no none of that, just because he's a hands-in-the-dirt farmer. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. That's how I know Clem first. The cannabis came later. And early on, prior to Cultivated, Clem and I were experimenting even with the business that we might do. And it turned out it just, he's a farmer. I wanted to focus on a brand, and it just made sense for us to do different, to go in slightly different directions on the business side. But Clem deserves all the credit in the world for being a great community person.
He's a great guy in general. Yeah. So, Anthony, we could talk to you all day. We appreciate you. But before we wrap up, kind of talk about what to look for. We're all about setting goals. 23 was like my Jordan year. 24 is going to be my Black Mamba year. So what do you have in mind coming up on the year 2024 for you?
That's great. Well, we want to keep expanding on the things that we're doing. The beverage market is a big space. Minnesota has a unique opportunity. Nowhere else in the country is selling stuff like Dabbler Depot we're inside right now. There is no other state that's allowing these products to be sold in these places. So it's creating this very unique craft market. Again, Dabbler Depot deserves a ton of credit for their branding. Yes. You walk in here, there's flowers hanging up. It feels different than a traditional liquor store. It's a very thoughtful, intentional place that's embracing these products. We think that's only going to grow and continue. We think other states are going to eventually hop on that train too. So we want to keep doing what we're doing. And simultaneously, we're building out our rec business, which could also include medical cannabis as well. And so that's a separate business. But, we're working to secure real estate as we speak. Our grow facility, can't tell you all where it's at. It's a secret. But the grow facility is being built. Genetics are propagating. We're looking for talent. We're recruiting and hiring and building out that team. Mm-hmm. And so I think like lots of other companies, we're getting our infrastructure in place so that when the state decides it's time to move, mm-hmm. we have all of our assets in place and are ready to roll. And we're not getting too far ahead of the state. They still have a lot of work to do on determining what the rules are going to be. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be patient with that process, support it where we can, advise when we can with the state and with regulators. And then when it's time to go, we hope to be in the mix.
Anthony, I've got one more for you. So there's a lot of people in this space entrepreneurially who don't have a perspective, or understanding, or interest in equity in terms of the industry. And I know you were a board member of Minority Cannabis Business Association, is that right?
Not a board member, but I've been active with that organization for many years.
I remember when you brought a lot of the board members to town, we went to dinner and kicked it with them.
That's right.
So you're aware that, there's a lot of underrepresentation in terms of people of color in the legal cannabis industry. What do you think it's going to be like in Minnesota?
That's an open-ended question. Oh, man, that's a loaded question.
Most of our guests are not going to be able to answer that. So I thought you might have a perspective.
I'll take a crack. I'll take a crack at it. If we look at the history of Minnesota, the recent history, we'll be the least equitable in the nation. If we were to look on paper at what's happened in this state for the last 25 years, longer. You could go back to Rondo. You could go back further than that. We have no ability to solve race and economic-based issues in this state. We've failed miserably over and over again. We're among the least competent states in the country. Us and Wisconsin, neck and neck on being abysmal in our approach to race and the economy. So we have to be realistic about that. And unless there's some intentional difference in how we approach this new economy, we should expect exactly the same. That we will look ahead 5 years from now, and if we do things exactly like we've done them in Minnesota, nobody of color will have any ownership stake of any, you know what I mean? It just won't be real. If we have any ownership at all, we'll be hanging on by our fingernails. And that'll be that.
So you saw this as optics, basically.
Well, so I want to say that's if we do nothing as a state other than what we've always done, that's what we should expect. Okay. Now, the opportunity is, and I think there's lots of people in the state that want something different and want a different outcome. And that will really depend on what the next iteration of the bill is. That'll depend on who the hires are for Office of Cannabis Management in that 120-person office and what that culture becomes at that office. And it will start at the top. And that starts now. That starts with the governor's office and that appointment. And the governor's office is driving that appointment and other state agencies. And I think they all want the right thing. But we'll see what that hire looks like, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Right. And if we get it right, there's enough smart people in the state. You guys are part of that for sure. And by extension, our networks. I think we could have one of the most innovative models in Minnesota. We've seen that happen with beverages, where we're one of one that have created this unique opportunity for businesses to pop up, sell these things in places where no other state can do it. And it's thriving. The economy's thriving. The sky isn't falling. People aren't getting hurt. Everybody loves it, and it could become a national model. There's an opportunity to do that in the equity space as well. And pay very close attention to this early licensing, and out of the gate, who are the first companies to be licensed in this new economy. That will be a great indication of what's to come. And if it's more of the same, and it's whoever has the biggest checkbook gets to participate and run at the front of the line, that's what it's probably going to be. Conversely, if we're thoughtful about who gets to enter the market early and who gets those early opportunities, we could create a model in this state that could be exportable and change what the cannabis space looks like around the country.
Well,
what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think, Marcus?
Well, I think that Minnesota, and I'm well aware of the racial disparities, the history, the structural racism, all of this. You know, I've been advocating for equity and justice since I was a teenager. But I do think that we're going to have black people are like 5% of Minnesota. We're going to have more than 5% of the license held by black people.
That's great. I hope
so. I think the way that we structured the license scheme is going to allow for, maybe a disproportionate, a lopsided percentage will be micro enterprises, but I think we're going to have some representation, diversity. Yeah. Will it be enough? Probably not. Yeah. But I don't think we're going to be completely shut out.
Yeah. I think you're right. And then on a high note, Charlene Briner, who is tasked by the governor to help build the Office of Cannabis Management, I have some indication from her that this is a big priority and she wants to solve it. That's a good sign. The governor's office has signaled over and over again that this is a big priority. We've seen what's happened with the Native community and a real deliberate, intentional effort to prop up the Native community and allow them to participate. There's lots of positive signs that we are headed in the right direction. So I hope you're right, Marcus. Yeah. I think you're probably right that we're on the right track and have a chance to do it right here.
I think so. I hope so.
Okay, great. Well, we'll
There's
be back.
Some black people with money that are putting their dollars together and getting ready. So yeah, here's to a diverse Minnesota cannabis.
Cheers.
Cheers to that.
Okay, well, we'll be back, and I'm excited to taste some of your products. Stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.